Captain Derek West's ship drifted through the cold silence of space. The stars outside twinkled like tiny, distant diamonds, while the hum of his ship's engines was the only sound. Derek had been on countless missions before, exploring planets and making contact with strange civilizations. But this mission was different. It was supposed to be a routine survey, just another planet to scan for life. Little did he know, this seemingly ordinary mission would change the fate of an entire alien race. The planet he was approaching was not like the others he had visited. It was covered with dark, swirling clouds, and the surface seemed to glow faintly, as if hiding something beneath. As Derek piloted his ship closer, a signal came through on his communications panel. It was weak but unmistakable, a distress signal. Unusual, Derek muttered to himself as he adjusted the controls. His fingers flew over the buttons, connecting to the source of the signal. The message was fragmented, but there was one word that came through loud and clear: help. Derek's heart skipped a beat. He had been trained to handle distress signals, but this was different. This wasn't just a call for help. It was a cry from someone who had been waiting far too long for rescue. His instincts told him he needed to act fast. Without hesitation, he steered his ship toward the surface of the planet. The landing was rough. The atmosphere was dense, and the stormy clouds made visibility nearly impossible. But Derek was an experienced pilot, and he managed to land in a large open area on the planet's surface. As the ship settled, he quickly gathered his gear, preparing to investigate. Outside, the air was thick with moisture, and the ground felt soft underfoot. Derek could barely make out the shapes of what appeared to be ruins in the distance. The buildings looked ancient, long abandoned, and worn by time. He made his way toward them, his boots crunching on the dry soil. After a few minutes of walking, he came across a strange, almost eerie sight. There were tall trees, more like giant plants than anything he had seen before, and beneath them, crouching in the shadows, were figures. They were tall, thin, and moved with a grace that almost seemed unnatural. Their skin was a pale blue, and their eyes, when they looked up at Derek, glowed faintly in the dim light. The figures didn't speak at first. They simply watched him, as if trying to decide whether he was friend or foe. Derek hesitated. This wasn't the typical greeting he was used to when meeting new species, but the distress signal was undeniable, and these beings were clearly in need of help. One of the figures stepped forward, the others staying back. It was a woman, tall and dignified, with silver hair that shone like moonlight in the dim surroundings. Her eyes were a deep shade of green, full of sorrow and wisdom, as if she had seen far too much suffering for her people. "Who are you?" Derek asked, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of concern. "What happened here?" The woman hesitated, then spoke in a voice that was both soft and commanding. "We are the Velerans," she said, her words slow but clear. "Once, our race was great. We thrived across the stars. But now, we are the last of our kind. Our planet is dying, and we have been forgotten by the galaxy." Derek frowned, confusion crossing his face. Forgotten? How could an entire civilization be forgotten? "We sent a distress signal long ago," the woman continued, her eyes downcast. "But no one came. No one even remembered us." Derek's heart ached at the sadness in her voice. He had heard of ancient civilizations, of races lost to time or wiped out by war, but he had never imagined encountering one like this. The Velerans seemed so forgotten, their once proud civilization reduced to ruins, with only a few survivors left. "What happened?" Derek asked, stepping closer. "Why didn't anyone help you?" The woman's gaze met his, and there was a quiet fire in her eyes. "We were abandoned," she said. "We had once been part of a great alliance, but that alliance turned away from us. We were no longer of use. So they left us, and now we are alone." Derek could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of generations of lost hope and forgotten promises. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. A whole race, once part of the galaxy's great civilizations, left to fade away into nothingness. It didn't make sense. His hand instinctively went to the communicator on his wrist. He couldn't just leave. Not now. He had to do something. These people, these Velerans, needed help, and Derek would make sure they got it. "I'm not leaving you here," Derek said firmly, locking eyes with the Veleran leader. "I promise you. I'll do whatever it takes to help you." The woman's eyes softened just a little, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. But Derek meant it. He would make sure the galaxy knew about the Velerans. He would make sure their cry for help didn't go unheard. And as he looked around at the ruins of their world, Derek knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Derek looked at the woman, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and hope. He had heard about forgotten civilizations before, but seeing it with his own eyes was something else entirely. The Velerans, once a mighty race, had been abandoned to die. As he stood there, in the shadow of their broken world, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility. He had to do something. But what could he do? He was just one man, one ship, against an entire galaxy. "I will not leave you here," Derek said, his voice steady. The words felt firm, like a promise. "I'll make sure your people are remembered. I'll contact Earth, the government. They can't ignore you." The woman's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite read. Hope? Doubt? She stepped back slightly, as though unsure whether to believe him. She had heard many promises before, but none had been kept. "You are human?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. "Yes," Derek replied, nodding. "I am from Earth. My name is Derek West." The Veleran woman regarded him for a long moment before speaking again. "Earth. I have heard of it, but I never imagined one of your kind would come here." Derek noticed a hint of disbelief in her voice, and it stung. He understood why. The Velerans had been ignored by the rest of the galaxy, and yet here he was, offering help, something no one had done for them in centuries. "My people have done a lot of things wrong," Derek said quietly, "but we're not all the same. I can help. I swear it." The woman studied him closely. There was something about her, her strength, her resilience, that told Derek she had seen and survived things far worse than he could imagine. And yet, in her eyes, he saw a flicker of something else. A deep, almost fragile hope that hadn't been completely extinguished. "My name is Arna," she said softly, taking a small step forward. "I am the leader of the Velerans. We are few now. Once we ruled the stars, but those days are long gone." Derek nodded. He could see the pain in her voice, the weight of centuries of struggle. He couldn't even begin to imagine what it was like to be part of a race that had once been so powerful, only to be forgotten and left to perish. "What happened to your people?" Derek asked gently, wanting to know more but not wanting to push too hard. He understood the importance of giving someone the time they needed to open up, especially in a situation like this. Arna sighed, looking out at the ruins of her world. "We were part of a great galactic alliance once. We had allies, we had friends, but when the Empire's power grew, we became a burden to them. We were pushed aside, left to fend for ourselves. Our world was slowly forgotten, and with it, our culture, our history. No one came to our aid. And now, we are the last of our kind." Derek felt a wave of sympathy for Arna, but also a growing sense of anger at the cruelty of it all. A whole race of people abandoned, ignored by the galaxy. He couldn't understand how anyone could let that happen. But one thing was clear to him now. Arna and her people needed more than just a promise. They needed action. "I won't let you be forgotten," Derek said, his voice filled with determination. "I'll go back to Earth. I'll speak to the government, get the word out. Your people will not die in silence." Arna's gaze softened. She took a step closer, her expression still guarded but less distant. "And if your people refuse to help?" she asked, her voice tinged with sadness. I'll find a way, Derek replied. I promise you, I won't stop. For a moment, there was a quiet stillness between them, as if the weight of the situation hung in the air. Arna stared at Derek, her eyes searching him, looking for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Derek's resolve was strong. She could feel it. Thank you, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you for seeing us. Derek nodded. I won't let anyone forget you. With that, Arna stepped back, her eyes scanning the ruins of her people's once great city. There were so many things left to be done, so much to rebuild. But for the first time in a long while, there was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the Velorans wouldn't fade into the shadows of history. As Derek turned to leave, Arna spoke again, her voice strong. We have always lived with the stars as our companions. Perhaps now, they will guide us once more. Derek smiled softly, feeling the weight of her words. Maybe they always have. Maybe it just took a little longer for us to see it. The two of them stood there for a moment, staring up at the vast, dark sky. A sky that, despite everything, still held the possibility of a future. And as Derek made his way back to his ship, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The Velorans had been forgotten by the galaxy, but they would not be forgotten by him. Derek was back in his ship, the Veloran city fading behind him. The promise he had made to Arna echoed in his mind. He had to contact Earth. He had to make sure that the Velorans wouldn't be forgotten. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be easy. The government was often slow to act on matters they didn't care about. And who would believe that a human was speaking for a long-lost alien race? As the ship's engines hummed steadily, Derek focused on the task at hand. He sent out a signal, using the best equipment his ship had. His message was clear. Help the Velorans. They are the last of their kind, and they need assistance now. But as the minutes passed, the silence on the other end of the line grew heavy. Derek's frustration grew. He knew the government was not always quick to respond to such messages, especially if there was no immediate benefit to them. The galaxy had its eyes on so many other problems. Why would they care about a forgotten race from a world no one even remembered? Derek tried again, using all the connections he had. He had seen the world change, how people's priorities shifted. But this time, he felt like he was fighting for something bigger than himself. It was about the Velorans, about Arna and her people. If he couldn't help them, who would? As his frustration began to build, a message finally came through. It wasn't from Earth's government, but from a familiar voice. It was Commander Leah Klein, an old colleague of his who worked with the Intergalactic Council. She had always been someone Derek trusted, someone who believed in doing what was right, even when it wasn't easy. Derek, Leah's voice crackled over the communicator. I've been tracking your signal. I didn't expect you to go this far, but I'll help. Tell me what's going on. Derek breathed a sigh of relief. Leah was his ally in this fight. It's the Velorans, Leah. They're the last of their kind. Their planet is dying, and they've been abandoned. I need help. They can't be left to fade away. There was a pause on the other end before Leah replied, her voice full of concern. The Velorans. They were part of the Galactic Alliance once, right? But I thought they were gone. The galaxy moved on a long time ago. I know, Derek said, his voice firm. But they're still here. And they need help. They're not just a forgotten footnote in history. They're people, and I'm not going to let them disappear. Leah was silent for a moment. Derek could hear the wheels turning in her mind. He knew she was weighing the risks. She understood the bureaucracy, the politics. This wasn't going to be an easy fight, but he trusted Leah. She would understand. All right, Derek, Leah finally said. I'll bring this up to the council. But don't get your hopes up. The council is slow, and they don't always act on things like this. I don't care about slow. I care about doing what's right, Derek replied, his voice strong. The Velorans deserve a chance. I won't back down. Leah's voice softened, and for the first time, Derek heard a hint of admiration in it. "You've got a lot of guts, Derek. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'll do what I can." "Thank you," Derek said, his heart lighter knowing he wasn't alone in this. As the communication ended, Derek leaned back in his chair, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The Velorans were far from home, and many in the galaxy had long forgotten them. But Derek wasn't one to back down. He had a promise to keep, and he would keep it. But even as he sat there, determination burning in his chest, he couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that lingered. Would the Council really help? Would the galaxy listen? Or would they push the Velorans aside, just as everyone else had done? He thought of Arna, standing tall amidst the ruins of her people's city. The hope in her eyes had not faded entirely, but it was fragile. It was a spark, one that could be snuffed out by the cold indifference of a universe that had moved on. He couldn't let that happen. Derek turned his ship back toward the Veloran homeworld, knowing he would need to return. He needed to be there for Arna and the Velorans, to help them rebuild what they had lost. He would keep the promise he had made, no matter what it took. As the ship sped toward the planet, Derek felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be difficult, and the odds were against him, but one thing was clear: he wasn't giving up. Not on the Velorans, not on Arna. And in that moment, he realized something. It wasn't just about saving the Velorans. It was about something bigger. It was about proving that even in a galaxy filled with uncertainty, there were still people willing to fight for what was right. People who would stand up for those who had been forgotten. Derek West was one of those people. Derek's ship glided steadily through the stars, but his mind was miles away. Every mile closer to the Veloran planet only reminded him of the battle ahead. The Council might help, but they might also refuse. The galaxy was not always kind to those who needed help the most. The Velorans had been forgotten by so many, and the hardest part of this journey might not be convincing Earth. It might be convincing the rest of the galaxy that they mattered. As his ship neared the Veloran homeworld, Derek's thoughts kept returning to Arna. He had promised her that he would help. He had promised to bring her people back into the light, to restore their place in the universe. But what if the galaxy didn't care? What if his efforts were all for nothing? The ship's systems beeped, signaling that he was entering the Veloran atmosphere. He looked out the window, seeing the planet below, its surface scarred from years of neglect and abandonment. It was a beautiful planet in its own way, but its beauty had been lost to time. Once, this world had been the heart of an advanced civilization. Now, it was a shadow of what it used to be. Derek landed his ship on the planet's surface, near the ruins where he had last seen Arna. As he stepped outside, the air was still and cold, a reminder of how much had been lost. The once proud buildings that had stood as symbols of Veloran power were now crumbling under the weight of centuries of neglect. Arna was waiting for him, standing tall despite the heavy burden of her people's history. She had been through so much, but there was still a fire in her eyes, a determination that refused to be extinguished. "You're back," she said softly, her voice tinged with both hope and doubt. "I'm not going anywhere," Derek replied firmly. "I've made some progress. The Council's considering your case." Arna looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And if they say no, what will you do then?" Derek hesitated. That was the question he had been asking himself ever since he made the promise to Arna. What would he do if the galaxy refused to help? The weight of that possibility pressed down on him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'll find a way. I swear it." Arna nodded, though she still seemed uncertain. Derek understood. She had heard too many empty promises in the past. She had seen so many people come and go, all with grand ideas that never came to fruition. She had every reason to doubt him. "Tell me what you need," Derek said. "I'll do whatever it takes." "We need resources," Arna said, her voice steady. "We need to rebuild, to reclaim what was lost. Our people can't survive like this forever. But we also need allies, others who will stand with us, not just watch us fade away." Derek nodded. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing the weight of Arna's words made it all the more real. The Velorans were more than just a forgotten race. They were a people with a rich history, a culture that deserved to be preserved. He had to help them. "I'll do everything I can," he promised again, his voice filled with determination. "But I need you to trust me. I'm fighting for you, Arna. You and your people won't be forgotten." She met his gaze, and for the first time, Derek saw a spark of real hope in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. "You truly believe that?" she asked quietly. "I do," Derek said, stepping closer. "I won't let anyone forget the Velorans. Not while I'm alive." Arna's gaze softened. She had been through so much, fighting to keep her people alive, struggling to rebuild what had been broken. But here, in this moment, with Derek's words filling the air, there was something different. For the first time in years, she felt like someone truly understood. Someone was fighting for them. "We will need more than just your words, Derek," she said, her voice firm with the knowledge of the challenges ahead. "The council may take their time, but we can't wait forever. We have to be ready to fight for what's ours." Derek nodded. He understood. The fight for the Velorans' future would not be easy. It would require patience, resources, and above all, the courage to stand against a galaxy that had already moved on. But if there was one thing he knew, it was that the fight was worth it. "I'll find a way," Derek said again, his resolve stronger than ever. "I'll talk to everyone I can. I'll make sure the galaxy sees the Velorans for what they are, a people worth saving." Arna studied him for a long moment. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that this might actually be possible. The galaxy was vast, and the odds were against them. But with Derek by her side, she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "Then we will wait," Arna said, her voice full of quiet strength. "But we will also prepare. If the galaxy doesn't come to our aid, we will find a way on our own." Derek smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Together, we can do anything." Days passed quickly as Derek and Arna worked together. The planet's ruins became a backdrop for their shared mission, to rebuild the Veloran race and restore their place in the galaxy. But time was running out. The longer they'd waited, the less chance there was to succeed. Derek knew this all too well, but Arna's calm strength kept him focused. "We need to take action now," Derek said one morning, staring at the galaxy's stars on the ship's console. "The Council's response is still slow. But I've been thinking, what if we don't wait for them?" Arna turned to him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What are you suggesting?" "We need to make the galaxy see the Velorans," Derek explained, his voice firm. "The only way to do that is to show them you're still alive. Not just a forgotten race in old history books. We need proof, something that can't be ignored." Arna's expression softened, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes. "And what if they ignore us again? We have nothing left to offer. Our city is in ruins, and our resources are scarce." "We don't need resources or grand cities," Derek said. "We just need you. You're proof that the Velorans still exist. You can show the galaxy that your people deserve a chance." Arna looked down for a moment, considering his words. She knew the risks. She had always known them. But Derek's confidence seemed to spark something in her. She had nothing left to lose. "If you're certain, I'll stand with you. But we must be ready for the consequences." "I'll stand with you, too," Derek said, his voice unwavering. "We'll make sure the galaxy doesn't turn its back on the Velorans." The next few days were filled with planning and preparations. Derek sent messages to every contact he had, reaching out to people in the galaxy who still had a sense of justice. The word needed to spread. The Velorans were not just a race from the past. They were a living, breathing people who deserved to be saved. While Derek worked tirelessly, Arna made her way through the planet's ruins, gathering what little remained of her people's history, ancient scrolls, old technology, and anything that could serve as proof of their past. She knew that this was not just about the Velarans' survival, it was about their legacy. If she could show the galaxy that they had once been great, then maybe they could find their way back to greatness. As they worked together, the weeks seemed to stretch on endlessly. Derek's messages were still unanswered, and the government's silence was deafening. But neither of them gave up. They could not afford to. Then, one day, a message came through. It was from Leah Klein, the same commander who had promised to help them before. Derek, Leah's voice crackled over the communication line. The council is listening. They've agreed to meet with you. Derek's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment they had been waiting for. You're serious? Derek asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I wouldn't joke about something like this, Lee replied. But I'll warn you, it won't be easy. The council is still skeptical. They want proof. They want to know why they should care about a race that has been forgotten for centuries. We have proof, Derek said, his voice growing stronger. I have Arna. She's the living proof that the Velarans still exist. Then gather your evidence, Derek, Leah said. The meeting is set for tomorrow. I'll be there, but you'll need to convince the council. If you don't, this could all fall apart. Derek nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. This was their chance, possibly their only chance, but he was ready. He had made a promise, and he wasn't about to let fear stop him now. I'll be ready, Derek said firmly. Thank you, Leah. We won't let you down. The next day, Derek and Arna stood before the council, the galaxy's most powerful leaders. They sat in a massive chamber, looking down at Derek and Arna with stern faces. There was no warmth in their eyes, no hint of understanding. The Velarans had been forgotten for so long that no one cared about their fate. Derek stood tall, his voice clear and strong as he spoke. I'm here today to show you that the Velarans still exist. They are not just a footnote in history. They are a people worth saving. Arna is living proof that they are still here, that they still deserve a chance. Arna stepped forward, her posture proud despite the fear in her heart. We have nothing left, but we still have hope. We ask for your help, not just for us, but for our future. We can rebuild, but we need your support. The council was silent, their eyes shifting between Arna and Derek. Derek could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. This was the moment that would decide everything. Finally, one of the council members spoke. What makes you think we should help you? You're a dying race. The galaxy has moved on. What is there left to save? Derek's voice did not waver. You don't see it. You don't see the potential, the history, the strength in the Velaran people. They have more to offer than you realize. Arna looked at the council, her eyes steady. We may have been forgotten, but we are not gone. We will not fade into nothingness. The silence in the room stretched on, thick with tension. Derek could only wait, hoping they had made their case. The silence in the chamber stretched on. Derek stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. Arna was beside him, her presence strong, though her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. The council had listened, but not yet spoken. Derek could feel the weight of the moment, the fate of the Velaran people hanging by a thread. One of the council members, an older alien with pale blue skin and silver eyes, leaned forward. You make a strong case, Derek. But what makes you think the galaxy will care about a race that has been forgotten for so long? Derek swallowed hard, but didn't back down. Because the galaxy has forgotten many things, but it has not forgotten what it means to stand for something. The Velarans have been abandoned, but they're not asking for charity. They're asking for a chance. Arna stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. We may have been lost to time, but we still have our strength. We can contribute. We can rebuild what we lost. All we need is support. The council exchanged glances, murmuring softly. Derek felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps they were finally starting to understand. But then, another council member, a tall alien with purple skin and sharp features, spoke up, her voice sharp like a blade. You ask us to invest in a race that has no resources, no cities, and no allies. What will they offer in return? Why should we risk anything for the Velorans? Derek's frustration threatened to spill over, but he clenched his fists, keeping calm. It's not about what they can offer in return. It's about what they will offer when given a chance. The Velorans have knowledge, culture, and history that no one else possesses. They have the strength to rise again, and that strength will benefit the galaxy. The council's members looked thoughtful, but still, no one spoke. The tension in the room thickened, and Derek began to wonder if they would ever see the galaxy's leaders change their minds. Just when Derek thought the council might dismiss them, Leah Klein, the human commander who had brought them here, stood up. If you won't help them, then I will. The room went quiet. Leah's bold words echoed through the chamber. She was a respected leader, but her decision to stand up for the Velorans was a gamble. Would the council dismiss her as well? I've seen the Velorans' strength firsthand, Leah continued. I've seen their resilience. If the galaxy won't help them, humanity will. And that's a promise. Derek couldn't believe what he was hearing. Leah was offering the kind of support he had only dreamed of. Her words were like a beacon of hope, shining in the darkest of times. The council could no longer ignore them. The blue-skinned council member spoke again, but this time his voice was different, softer, more thoughtful. Perhaps we've been too quick to judge. The Velorans have something the galaxy cannot afford to overlook. But the question remains, what will we do with this chance? Arna, her eyes filled with quiet determination, stepped forward once more. We need time. Time to rebuild. Time to heal. If you give us that time, we will prove ourselves. We will show you that the Velorans are worth the risk. The council remained quiet for several long moments. Derek could feel the weight of their decision pressing down on him. This could be their only chance. If they failed here, there might be no second opportunity. Finally, the purple-skinned council member nodded slowly. Time. Time is something we can grant. But it won't be easy. The galaxy doesn't change overnight. But if you can show us that the Velorans are truly worth the investment, then we will stand with you. Derek's heart soared, and Arna's eyes lit up with hope. They had done it. The Velorans would have a chance. The council's decision was not perfect, and there were still many obstacles ahead. But it was a beginning. A chance for the Velorans to rebuild, to prove themselves once again. It was a victory, and it was only the first step of many. As they left the council chamber, Derek and Arna exchanged a look of shared relief and triumph. The path ahead would not be easy, but they had taken the first step toward a new beginning. We did it, Derek said, his voice filled with awe. They gave us a chance. Arna nodded, her expression full of determination. This is just the beginning. We have a long way to go, but we will rebuild. We will show them that the Velorans are more than just a forgotten race. Derek smiled. And we'll do it together. The two of them walked out of the chamber side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy might have forgotten the Velorans, but now they would never be ignored again. The sun set over the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the land. Derek stood at the edge of the Veloran settlement, watching as the workers continued their tasks. It had been weeks since the council's decision, and the Velorans had begun to rebuild, just as they had promised. Arna was beside him, her eyes scanning the busy scene. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The Velorans were no longer just survivors. They were thriving, finding their place once again in the galaxy. Look at them, Arna said softly. I never thought I'd see this day. Derek nodded. He had seen the Velorans struggle, but now they were beginning to flourish. The once barren fields were starting to sprout new crops, and the sounds of construction echoed in the distance as they rebuilt their homes, their cities, and their future. It wasn't easy. Every day had its challenges, and there were still many things to rebuild, not just in the physical world, but in the hearts of the Valoran people. They had been forgotten for so long, and the scars of their abandonment ran deep. But with each passing day, Derek saw something new in their eyes: hope. Arna turned to him, her expression serious. "Do you think the galaxy will really accept us? Will they truly give us the support we need?" Derek smiled, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from his shoulders. "It's not about them accepting us anymore. It's about us proving that we belong here. And we will." They had already made huge strides. Leah's commitment to the Velerans had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited their journey toward a new future. Humanity's support had given them the resources they needed, and Derek had become a voice for the Velerans in the galaxy. Though many still doubted them, a growing number had begun to see the potential in this once-forgotten race. Arna reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Thank you. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't be here today." Derek shook his head. "It's not just me. We've all worked together for this. You've led the way. Your people have fought to survive, and now you're showing the galaxy what you're capable of." As they stood there, watching the sun dip lower in the sky, Derek felt a sense of pride that he hadn't felt in a long time. The journey had been difficult, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but the Velerans were no longer a forgotten race. They were rebuilding, with a future full of possibility. Later that evening, a ceremony was held in the heart of the settlement. The Velerans had invited representatives from several galactic factions, including the Council, to witness their progress. Derek and Arna stood at the front, waiting for the moment when they would show the galaxy just how far they had come. Leah Klein was there as well, her presence a reminder that humanity had stood beside the Velerans from the very beginning. The human leader smiled at Derek, offering him a nod of approval. He had become something more than just a protector of the Velerans. He had become a bridge between their people and the galaxy, a symbol of what could happen when different races worked together for a common purpose. The ceremony began, and the Veleran leader, an elderly female with silver hair and wise eyes, stepped forward to address the crowd. "We stand here today not as a forgotten people, but as a people reborn. The galaxy may have abandoned us, but we have found a new home, a new family, and a new future. And we will prove to you that we are worthy of it." Her words were met with a mixture of silence and tentative applause. The galaxy had been skeptical of the Velerans for so long. But now, as they stood on the brink of something new, there was a sense of hope that had not been there before. Perhaps this was the beginning of something larger. Perhaps the galaxy itself was ready to learn from the Velerans' resilience. After the ceremony, Derek found himself standing alone for a moment, lost in thought. The journey had been long and filled with uncertainty, but they had made it. The Velerans had found a protector in humanity, and in turn, humanity had found something to fight for, a reason to stand up for a people who had been forgotten for far too long. Arna approached him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We've come so far, haven't we?" Derek smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We have. And this is just the beginning." The future was no longer uncertain. It was full of possibility, of growth, and of new beginnings. The Velerans were no longer just a race lost in time. They were a people with a future, a people who would stand proudly alongside the rest of the galaxy. And as Derek looked up at the stars, he knew that this was only the first chapter of their story. Together, the Velerans and humanity would face whatever challenges lay ahead, building a future that was brighter than anything they could have imagined.